We had easily our biggest year in Season 4. The question is, would we be able to top it? Did we need to take that step backwards in order to go forwards? Would we be able to do it? Kinda? And welcome back, one and all, to another episode of Red Rain. This is season number 5 of our Build a Nation in Albania. And if you recall, season 4, we made the Champions League phase for the very first time, just managing a single point, a draw in our last match. We needed to do better. We were thinking that maybe getting through the Champions League and into the Champions League phase might not be the best thing for us. Maybe if we could drop down into the Europa League, Europa Conference League, that might be a little bit better. Did that plan come to fruition? Well, you're going to have to find out a little bit later in the episode. We did, however, manage to get improvements to our training facilities once again. Very excited about that. And we even have our kits loaded in, finally into the save, so you guys can see what we've been wearing. And I'll make sure I highlight this each year because I do like to switch them up each and every year. You may remember in last episode, we found out that we were going to have a ton of money with which to play this year. 15 million or so in transfer budget and a crap ton of money for the wage budget. Now, before we get into the ins and outs, I do want to kind of temper things a little bit. While we do have a ton of money, being able to spend that money and spend it effectively, it's going to be a challenge. For example, we are scouring the world for the best 15 to 18-year-olds that may be out there, and we are finding plenty. However, once we click that button to see who may be actually interested in joining us, our list of 20 goes down to 2. So finding those world-class players that we need in order to succeed, that's going to be a little bit more difficult than we thought, because money isn't always just the only thing that talks. In fact, the biggest issue is going to be our league reputation. Just 2 stars, even though we have won the league now 4 years in a row coming into this season. We have been in the Champions League phase as recently as 6 months ago. Yeah, that's not creeping up nearly as quickly as we would like. Hopefully that is something that does get adjusted just a little bit in the next version of Football Manager. That isn't to say that we have been completely incapable of bringing players into the squad, but first we're going to deal with the ones that have left. The first is Ray Bacani. We brought him in a season and a half ago as an experienced central midfielder, and frankly, he just did not get the playing time that we needed to give him. I didn't really have a lot of faith in him, even though he is consistent and has a ton of agility. I don't know, man. He was just down on my personal depth chart, so we finally let him go. He's at Tamori. It was a bit bittersweet saying goodbye to our 28-year-old Brazilian right back, Marcos Ramos. I enjoyed his time with the team. He did well for us, picking up a goal and 4 assists in his final season. Capped out with 7 goals, 5 assists in the 25-26 year. Just getting a little bit older, and we had some youngsters behind him who were demanding more playing time, not only with their words, but with their actions. We allowed him to go back to Brazil on a free. Attilio Gelli, who came in our very first youth intake, was just never going to find a spot in our squad. He just played positions that we don't take advantage of. He had been out on loan for the last couple of years. We finally decided to sell the youngster. He's off to Casapia. Did pretty well in his 2 loan spells with Lushnia, but we decided that 74,000 euros for a player that was never going to see playing time for us was something we couldn't turn down. We did want to sell him to an Albanian side. There just were no takers. Everyone else leaving us was going out on loan for the season. KF Erdzeni took on 19-year-old Greek center back Christos Voltsis. We did try to sign another Greek player who really wasn't interested in joining us. We sent Voltsis to meet with him to try to convince him to come, and the guy was like, yeah, I'm going to play based on reputation, not because somebody asked me to. So thanks, but no thanks. This move will make a little more sense once you see the players that we brought in, but we loaned out 23-year-old Serbian defensive midfielder Luka Nenadovic to KF Bielis for the season. He was seeing less and less playing time with us as things are going. I think he only had 1 goal contribution last year, so we felt that maybe it was time to move on, but we did want to keep him in-house. He is a talented player, and if he could make B-list better, then that's better for us. 18-year-old goalkeeper Jacopo Serena is going to be spending the year at our affiliate in Podgorica, where he will be joined by 17-year-old midfielder Sokol Haidari. And then we sent out a pair of youngsters to FK Velishiku to round out our summer window. Bersamir Devishi, a 17-year-old right winger, a position that we don't play, and 18-year-old left winger / striker Christian Sali. Now, as far as the players coming in, there were a couple of them that when we signed them, we weren't sure if we were signing them necessarily for us or to bolster other Albanian teams while they develop. One such player was 19-year-old center back from Syria, Salim Ismail. Good marking and tackling, positioning, he's just very good at this position. The bravery and aggression are absolutely fantastic. Does need to work a little bit on his consistency. For now, he's going to remain with us, but he's going to play on our youth squad. One player definitely intended for our senior squad is central midfielder 25-year-old Federico Romeo. I cannot believe that we got him on a free transfer. Now, we are paying a pretty penny for him, but hopefully he is going to pay off. As you can see, if you are looking at the bottom, had a pretty successful start to the season in our Champions League qualifying matches. Of course, we are going to get to that later on. Good balanced personality. Natural in several positions across the midfield, rated as a star player. I mean, 4 stars for what that's worth. Now, he doesn't really love the big matches. That is an issue, and he is very, very right-footed. Maybe we can work on that with him. But Romeo, definitely glad to have him on the squad. He's not the only Italian midfielder we signed. However, we also brought in Marco Frigerio. He's 26 years old. We're paying him about half what we are Romeo. Another very talented player in the central midfield. He stands at 6'1", which is great. Look at those physicals. All well above average for the league. Good off the ball. His passing is good. Vision could use a slight bit of work, but that's really not the way that our midfield works, believe it or not. But we are very glad to have him in. We are trying to really bolster that section because, they really are the link between our incredible attack and our very strong defense. We just needed to make sure the middle of the pitch was a little bit more solidified this year. And to help with that, we brought in another potential superstar in the making. 19-year-old Serbian defensive midfielder. He can also play center back. 6'2". Man, can he get in the air. Nemanja Perisic. Very excited. He's going to be playing primarily in the time that he is playing. Not 100% certain at this point if he's going to be in the starting lineup regularly or not at such a young age, but he is going to be anchoring that 3-man midfield. Very excited to have him do it. Great positioning, marking, tackling, and that jumping reach. His mental abilities are also absolutely fantastic. Not much of a leader on the pitch, and he's not very good offensively, but that's not really what we need him for. His jumping reach is impressive. Just the one con, he's got to improve his passing a little bit. We will attempt to work on that, but welcome in Nemanja Perisic. Hopefully he's worth it because he did cost us 650,000 euros. And finally, we needed a little bit more depth with the loss of Marcos Ramos at our right back position. Actually needed more depth right and left back, but with Roberto being able to play both, Antonio Tomic being able to play both, we felt that we could move things around a little bit. So we brought in on loan from Partizan, 21-year-old Serbian Uros Shuk. He wasn't getting any playing time there, and we decided that we just needed somebody extra. Now, normally I don't like pulling players from opposition teams, but he had no spot on the squad. He was unhappy. They wanted to move him. They actually wanted to sell him, but he didn't want to join us right away. He preferred a loan move instead, so we did that. We were able, spoiler alert, to bring him in on a permanent deal in the winter window. We finally made that offer. He agreed to stay. We are glad he's here. A quick peek at the Media Dream 11, and oh my word, all 11 players on the roster for KF Vlatsnia, they think we're going to win the league. I tend to agree. I'm sure this is not going to come as a shock to you, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on our regular season. We got off to a bit of a rough start, having to salvage a 2-2 draw against Dinamo City, but as you noticed, through the midway point of the season, Not a single blotch of red in the Categoria Superiore. We were perfect through our first 18, enjoying after 18 matches an 11-point cushion over Elbassani sitting at the top of the table, 17 over third place KF Bilis. Unfortunately, our perfect season would come to an end just a couple of weeks into the new year against our rivals, KF Partizani, as Konchari scoring a brace, one from the penalty spot to take a 2-1 lead. We would get one back off of a corner for Gero, putting in the near post header, but even though we managed 24 shots to Partizani's 6, yeah, we ended up dropping our first full 3 points of the season to a rival. At the midway point, we did find ourselves having to make some tough decisions as far as the roster was concerned. And the first casualty was fan favorite Branimir Shavar. He just was not getting the playing time we needed for him to get throughout the Champions League campaign early on and the preseason, the beginning of the year. So we finally loaned him out to Tuzla City. His time here is done. But he was not the only hard choice that we had to make. Ousmane Lama, who was going to be going off in the winter to the Africa Cup of Nations, was starting to grumble because he wasn't getting enough playing time, even though we were playing him quite a bit. But we were trying to rotate through our strikers, give everybody a bit of time, some rest, keep fresh legs out there. And we got in an offer from Saudi Arabia. We just seemingly could not refuse 1 million euros for the 20-year-old Ghanaian. We had spent 66,000 on him, so a nice amount of profit, but he is now off at Altai. One of the challenges we ran into this year was with our homegrowns. Now, you need to have 5 homegrown at Nation players in your game day lineup, and we were struggling to do that without putting in Mario Daisanani as our backup goalkeeper because he is homegrown, which meant that Gabriel Bajau was being left out more often than not. So we finally decided to move the Brazilian on. He's going back to his home country. We said goodbye. He made just a single appearance for us this year. And I think for season 6, we're going to need to pay a little bit more attention to that. If not for our starting squad, then for guys on the bench, and maybe not rely on transfers so much to add depth to our squad and instead rely on the guys we already have in-house. Another casualty of the playing time was Luka Klajic, standing at only 6 foot even. Didn't really see him much as a backup center back for us, and we were getting tremendous play out of Tomic and Roberto rotating through. We also still had Zane Siule as a left back as well, so he was just the odd man out, the 25-year-old Serbian, after making just 10 appearances for us in the first half of the year, out on loan to KF Bilis. And finally, my friends, the move that kind of broke my heart, but after 3 seasons with the club, Georgi Petrovic has moved on. We've loaned him out to MTK Budapest. We couldn't keep him in Albania, and even though we had a couple of conversations during the year about him being a more of a squad option, he just wasn't having it in the end and finally started to demand a move. Fan favorite of mine. Hopefully he will be back and he's not gone permanently. Time will tell, but Georgi Petrovic, thank you very much for your service. But the playing side was not the only aspect of this team that was seeing a shakeup in the second half, because former player, team favorite of mine, Bakim Balai, who we had coaching our U21s, he took a management gig of his own, finally leaving Vlatsnia to join Dranica. Very, very sad to see him go. We tried to convince him to stay, but if you've played enough Football Manager, you know that basically is just going to guarantee that your player is going to leave. Bakim Balai, we wish you the best. I am very glad to have had you here, not only as a player, but to be able to retain your services after retirement as well. We also did take another hit in our youth academy. Now we have a pretty good director of football. We have a pretty good head of youth development, and we've got tremendous facilities, and this is the youth intake we got. Nobody above a good talent, a lot of crappy personalities in there. So of all the players that came through this year and graduated our academy, we signed 0. Not that it really was making much of a difference as we secured a playoff spot with 9 matches left to go. 70 points through 27. Still just the 1 loss. We would, however, drop another decision again to FK Partizani. 2 losses on the year. Both of them to the same club. Both of them to a rival. Both of them to a rival in the bottom half of the table. But such is life. Vllaznia, Elbassani, Bilis, and Trbuni to participate in the playoffs this year, once again coming in first place. A record points haul for Vllaznia, 90 points, 6 draws, 2 losses to go with our 28 wins, which also tied a league record for us. Meanwhile, we still had the playoffs to play. We would match up against 4th place KF Trbuni in the semifinals of the playoffs, and we would get the scoring started early. Great feed to Mattia Mosconi, who scored more than 25 goals. We'll take a look at his stats after we finish with the regular season highlights. He was absolutely fantastic for us this year. Ball across, though, Trbuni able to equalize in the 38th minute, but then we would start charging back. Mattia Mosconi with another goal off of the save of Moya, picking up the loose garbage and turning it into gold for a 2-1 lead. We would make it 3-1, and as Tojai popping a header over the outstretched arms of the goalkeeper just before the half. They would claw their way back within 1 from the edge of the box. Leishi into the middle. Kuka keeping it away from the defense, beating Semjurovic. But that would be the end of the scoring for the opposition, and we would not be done. We would add 1, icing on the cake. Yurim Hassani, a great young player, homegrown, so he finds his way on our bench quite often, although he did start the year on the U19 level, picking up goal number 4 and giving us a 4-2 victory. Things a bit more interesting in the other semifinal between Elbassani and Bilis. Now, Loni Paolo Manella, who they got from us, got things started in the 79th minute, putting Elbassani ahead. They thought that might be enough, but then Jefferson Kibe, a very talented young player, scored in the 87th minute to tie things up. They could not settle it in extra time, so it went down the penalties, and Bilis ended up victorious in the shootout, 6-5. Their luck would run out there in the 2nd minute of play in the match against us. Great ball to Mosconi. What a first touch. Beats Mediri to make it 1-0 Vllaznia. Only 2 shots on goal the entire match for Bilis. Not a single one on target as Mosconi made it 2-0 16 minutes in. Mattia Mosconi absolutely excellent. Šurić scoring from the spot, his 5th penalty goal of the season. Made it 3-0. Now here's where it came. Ball over the top, thrown in the middle off of the foot of Ismail, who came in off of the bench. It was considered an own goal, 3-1, but then we would make it 4. Again, Hassani with the goal, getting the last word in stoppage time in the second half in back-to-back matches in the playoffs. Yurim Hassani, very excited for him for next year. He is definitely going to be one of our homegrown players on the bench. I say definitely, I say that now, but who knows what's going to happen when we actually get to that point. And once again, we were crowned champions of Albania. We also managed to make it to the final of the Albanian Cup, a match that saw us pitted against Bilis again, and Mihailo Spazojevic getting things going 31 seconds into the match. They did manage 4 shots on goal and 2 on target this time. They just could not put it past our goalkeeper. We did not have that problem. Vanya Pelshko adding the exclamation point in the 72nd minute. And for the 3rd consecutive season, we lifted the Albanian Cup as well, which meant we did the domestic treble because, oh yeah, we won the Super Cup too. So how do we do in Europe, you may ask? Well, the first qualifying round of the Champions League pitted us against San Marino side Trey Penny, and it went about as well as you would expect for a San Marino side. Individual goals from Georgi Petrovic, Marko Šurić, Sergio Daci, a nice youngster who came in through our youth intake, and Nemanja Djekovic on the back line, along with braces from Mihailo Spazojevic, Mattia Mosconi, Luka Broderic, and Luka Tosi, saw us win the home leg by a score of 12-0, which we followed up with a slightly more subdued 4-0 victory on the road with a brace for Yurim Hassani and goals from Luka Broderic and Luka Klajic from the penalty spot. The second round was a bit more challenging on paper as we took on Polish side Ferencvaros, but a great cross from Roberto finds its way to Usmani Lama to give us a 1-0 lead on the road. Now, they would be able to equalize off of a corner in the 50th minute, and for the next 30 minutes, it was a bit of a cagey affair before we found a corner goal of our own, Luka Broderic heading it home to make it 2-1. We would add another just a couple of minutes later, Roberto moving up the right side, playing it into the middle, finding Luka Tosi, putting it in, short side pass to Buse. However, we would cede a stoppage time goal to Ferencvaros, and we would go home with a minuscule 3-2 lead. And Abofani from the spot in the 15th minute of the second leg did tie things up on aggregate, but we were then able to add a pair of goals to finally take the lead. Tomic scoring from just outside the box, and then Vanya Pelshko feeding Tomic again, who will play it back to Pelshko, beating Debuse 1-on-1, and we would end up with a 5-3 victory on aggregate to move on to the third qualifying round, where we would have a pretty easy time against Bosnian side Drjitski, winning 4-0 at home behind goals from Luka Tosi, Usmani Lama, Federico Romeo, and Mihailo Spazojevic, which made it very easy to stomach a match where we did not score at all, but we held Zrinski to a clean sheet on their pitch, 0-0 on the night, 4-0 on aggregate, and once again, we are in the Champions League playoff round, where we would match up against the team that beat us in the league phase last year in Crvena Zvezda. Great flick-on header into the path of Mattia Mosconi put us up 1-0, and we would run rampant on them at home, putting up a 4 spot. Romeo chipping it to Spazojevic, back post, beating Glazer 2-0 in the 72nd minute. 87th minute now, we would go ahead 3-0. Luka Tosi back for Federico Romeo, putting it past the keeper. We just loved going on that near side. And finally, in stoppage time, we thought we had turned it over, but Luka Tosi winning it back. Mattia Mosconi drilling it from 25 yards out for a very emphatic victory against a very tough team. A 4-0 aggregate lead that we would do our level best to piss away as things went back to Belgrade. In the 17th minute, they were able to take a 1-0 lead, so now it's 4-1. Turnover in the midfield. Kongwa to Bukhari into the box, beats Samorovic, now 4-2. Luka Tosi, though, would get one back a little bit later, but not before Mimovic would send it in. Lucic off of the crossbar, getting his own rebound. It is now 4-3 on aggregate. But as I mentioned, Luka Tosi would find the back of the net for us, taking the feed from Usmani Lama to make it 5-3 on aggregate, 3-1 on the night. Crvena Zvezda would get one back in the 50th minute. Mićolikić scoring past Samurovic, but we would then clamp down and hang on. And for the second consecutive season, we were going to the Champions League phase. If I'm being perfectly frank, at this point in the season, wasn't 100% sure that we did the right thing. But when our fixture list came out, I didn't feel so bad. Home matches against Basel, PSG, okay, fine. Galatasaray, and a chance for revenge at home against Shakhtar, with away matches at Celtic Park, at Old Trafford, at Young Boys, and at Real Madrid. But looking at this, I was feeling a little bit better than I had at the same time last year, because we started our Champions League phase campaign with a bang at home against Basel. Back post header by Mihailo Spazojevic, putting us ahead. They would tie things up as we turn over the ball in the midfield. Janko feeding Ayeti to make it 1-1 at the death of the first half. But Usmani Lama would make it 2-1, taking the feed from Fofana in past the goalkeeper. 2-1 your final score. Yes, we were at home, but it was our first Champions League phase victory of the save. Sadly for us, though, we would recognize that we were just still overmatched in the competition, even though we've done better this year than we did last year. We lost away at Celtic by a score of 3-1. Dropped a 4-2 decision at home in front of a capacity crowd against PSG. Now, to be fair, when you've got a small Latvian side going up against a team that can put out Ousmane Dembele, Xavi Simons, and Vinny Jr., yeah, we're probably not going to win that one. The fact that we scored 2 against PSG made me very, very happy. We dropped a 3-1 decision at Old Trafford to Man United. Who knew that Bruno Fernandes was going to be, well, so good against us? And even though I felt watching the match that we were playing decently well against young boys, they dominated us in possession, and it showed. We managed the 90th minute goal from Luka Tosi, but still fell 2-1. But then Galatasaray came to town, and they were behind us on the table at the time of this match, and I'm like, hey, we should be able to win this pretty easily. And then 12 minutes and 15 seconds in, they took a 1-0 lead. However, we would then take over. Luka Broderic off of the corner, making it 1-1. He would pick up a second corner goal in the 49th minute to give us the 2-1 lead, a lead we would not relinquish. In fact, we would get one more. Ball played across by Tosi. Romeo coming in, putting it behind Alte, and all of a sudden, we've got 6 points in the Champions League. Now, we knew that we were going to drop all 3 on the road at Real Madrid. The fact that we only lost 3-1 was pretty impressive. We did a very good job defensively in this match, in my personal opinion. We did allow a brace to Jude Bellingham and a single goal to Jamal Musiala, and we picked up just an own goal of our own, but it was a good effort. We just got unlucky that it just happened to hit Piero Hincapié before it went in. However, if we could pick up a victory at home against Shakhtar, we would find ourselves somewhere we never had been before, and that was the knockout phases of the Champions League. Unfortunately, though, it just was not meant to be. We played a good match. They just got luckier than we did, picking up a goal off of a back post header, and then after recycling a corner kick opportunity, able to sneak one past Semirovic, and Shakhtar for the second consecutive season beats us in the Champions League, this time at home by a 2-0 score. So on the plus side, we did pick up 6 points on 2 victories in our 8 league phase matches. No draws, however, and that -8 goal difference, not fantastic. We finished 29th in the league phase, but as I mentioned, we were very, very close to actually making the knockouts, and I think that is going to be our goal for the coming year. So really the big question is, how did everybody else in Albania do in Europe? Honestly, decently well, but I think there was a bit of unluckiness that ended up creeping in at some point. For example, Elbasan had a pretty easy time in the Europa Conference League Path First qualifying round against Kosovan side Drita, winning 5-1 on aggregate, before brushing aside Hungarian side Kecskemeti 5-3 in the second round, where they just couldn't repeat the magic in the third qualifying round against Dinamo Zagreb, losing both legs by a score of 2-1 and a 4-2 aggregate score. Dinamo City absolutely spanked Progress 8-1 over their 2-legged affair in the first qualifying round, where they then had the misfortune of matching up against Dunstreda. Now a 1-1 draw on the road, a 2-2 draw at home, so they played well. However, they weren't as good in the penalty shootout, and they were bounced out after the second qualifying round. Now, due to our coefficient rankings to start the year, KFB List began the competition in the second qualifying round, where even though they drew 2-2 on the road against Neftchi, a 4-0 dominant victory at home saw them through to the third qualifying round with a 6-2 aggregate score, where they would see a similar end to their European campaign, winning 3-2 on the night, but tied 4-4 on aggregate. They just could not defeat Swedish side BK Haken. They lost on pens 4-2. But on the backs of those performances, we managed a 5.875 point year, giving us 19.125 coefficient points to begin the next year. So we're going to jump all the way from 35th up, if I've done my math correctly, to 29th. And as an added bonus, the Republic of North Macedonia will once again be below us on the coefficient charts, which means we're going to see massive changes to the qualifications coming out of the Albanian League. Nothing will change in the Champions League. We are still going to be entering as the winner, the Champions Path, first qualifying round of the Champions League. However, second place in the league will now be in the Europa League qualifying rounds, which means just 2 teams qualifying for the Europa Conference League. Both of them will be in the second qualifying round. Whether that is good or bad, my friends, I frankly do not know. What I do know is we need to make massive changes for season number 6. We've got to assume that we're going to be making the league phase of the Champions League again, which means we need to do better. We need to bolster our squad for Europe. We need to make sure that we have quality players who are homegrown that can fill out our bench. We did have a bit of a registration problem in Europe as well as far as that concerns. So we need to pare down the non-Albanian players, boost up the Albanian sides. Meanwhile, I think we need to focus our transfer energy on players that can make the other sides in Albania better, because we definitely need at least one more side making a league phase if we are going to truly start rocketing up the European coefficients. If you've enjoyed the series so far, and if you made it this far in the video, thank you so very much for being here. Season number 5 has been fantastic. Hopefully season 6 is even better. Make sure you hit that like button. If you haven't caught the whole series, you can catch up by clicking right over there, and I really appreciate you being here. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and come on back on Friday for the recap of season 6. Hopefully we've done even better than we have this year. Looking forward to seeing you then. Until then, my friends, bye-bye.